At Thanksgiving dinner, my husband's cousin laughed and pointed his fork directly at me. "Your main job," he said, smiling like he just delivered the funniest line of the evening, "is posing for recruitment posters." A few people laughed. Not everyone, just enough. And my husband, the man who had promised to stand beside me, stared down at his plate, said nothing, did nothing, just sat there cutting his turkey like the moment wasn't even happening. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I just sat there looking at him, waiting for one word, one sentence, anything. It never came. But here's what nobody at that table knew. Not Jake, not his smiling mother, not the relatives chuckling along. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what I'd done, what I'd survived, what one specific night years ago had cost me, and what it had saved someone else. And they had absolutely no idea that 3 weeks later, in a room full of Navy officers, retired commanders, and community leaders, Jake was going to stand at a podium, click to the next slide, and finally find out. Stay with me, because what happened next, nobody at that Thanksgiving table could have prepared for. My name is Dana. I was 39 years old, a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, with thousands of flight hours logged and years of service behind me. I didn't look like what people expected. I never did. That's always been the quiet problem, hasn't it? People build an image of what a military officer should look like, usually someone who looks nothing like me, and when reality doesn't match the picture in their heads, they start explaining you away. She got promoted because she's attractive. She got the opportunities because they needed diversity. She got noticed because someone needed the right face on a poster. The details change, the message never does. I'd been hearing versions of that message my entire career. I'd learned to smile past it. I'd learned to keep flying, keep performing, keep doing my job better than the people who doubted me. Most days, that was enough. That Thanksgiving, we drove to the Harlan family home in Chesapeake, Virginia, a split-level brick house they'd owned for nearly 30 years. Turkey, football, kids chasing each other with paper plates. My mother-in-law pretending not to be stressed while being obviously stressed. Perfectly normal family holiday. My husband Mark was a good man, mostly. A teacher. Easygoing, well-liked. The kind of person who genuinely believed that if you kept things calm, kept the peace, nothing bad would stick. People liked him for that. I loved him for it, most of the time. The problem with people who avoid conflict is that sometimes avoiding conflict means avoiding responsibility. I didn't know yet how clearly I was about to see that. I noticed Jake Heron the moment I sat down. Mark's cousin, 31 years old, Navy lieutenant, genuinely talented, and absolutely exhausting. Every conversation became about Jake. His accomplishments, his upcoming leadership presentation at Naval Station Norfolk. The commander specifically requested me, he kept saying. Nobody had asked, but Jake kept going anyway. His father, Robert Harland, sat at the head of the table, mostly in silence. Retired Navy Command Master Chief, 70 years old, sharp eyes. The kind of man who could say 3 words and make you reconsider your entire life. I noticed Robert watching Jake, the way you watch someone walking too close to the edge of something. But what happened next? Nobody could have prepared for. About halfway through dinner, someone asked how work was going. Busy, I said. Simple. Honest. Jake leaned back, smirked. Still flying? Sometimes? Depends on what's needed, I said. He laughed. That is the most officer answer I have ever heard. A couple of people chuckled. I smiled. Still fine. Then he kept going, because Jake always kept going. You know what I always find funny? He gestured with his fork. The public has this image of military life, especially Navy officers. I took a sip of iced tea. I already knew exactly where this was heading. Jake looked directly at me. You're still in the Navy, right? Last time I checked. More laughter. Then, so what's your job these days? Same as before. Jake grinned. Let me guess. His mother said his name softly, but she was smiling. That made it worse. He pointed the fork at me. Your main job is posing for recruitment posters. A few people laughed. The easy laugh. The kind people use when they don't want to challenge someone. I stared at him. Not angry, not yet. Mostly disappointed, because I'd heard versions of that joke before. From strangers, from people who assumed women only advanced because they photographed well in uniform. It wasn't clever, it was just tired. Before I could answer, Aunt Patty jumped in with a smile. Oh, come on, Dana does photograph well. More laughter. I looked at Mark, just for a second. He was staring at his plate. That hurt more than the joke. I wasn't expecting a speech. I wasn't expecting a dramatic defense. One sentence would have been enough. Just one. That's not funny, Jake. 4 words. Instead, silence. And Jake mistook my silence for surrender. He leaned forward. Hey, I'm kidding. Nobody responded. Mostly. That word landed in the room like something sharp. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't comfortable, even if they couldn't say exactly why. That's when I heard a fork touch a plate, a soft, deliberate, metallic sound. Robert Harland had set his fork down. The table quieted without anyone deciding to quiet it. He looked at me, not at Jake, not at anyone else. At me. Dana. Yes, sir. His voice stayed completely calm. What was your call sign? Jake immediately snorted. Dad, come on. Robert ignored him. What was it? For a moment I thought about dodging the question. I never liked talking about that part of my career. But Robert waited. So I answered, jukebox. The reaction was immediate, not from everyone, just from him. His eyes widened. Barely. But enough. Enough that I noticed. Enough that Jake noticed too. Robert sat back slowly. Then he looked at me with something close to disbelief. Jukebox? Mercer? I nodded once. Across the table, Jake frowned. What does that mean? Nobody answered. Robert turned toward his son. The disappointment on his face hit harder than any angry outburst could have. Jake, you should have stopped talking about 5 minutes ago. The room froze. Jake laughed nervously. Dad, what are you even talking about? Robert shook his head slowly, almost to himself. No idea. The rest of dinner never recovered, and I sat through all of it, thinking about one thing. Not Jake, not Robert, not even the call sign. I kept thinking about my husband, sitting right beside me, who had watched every single moment and said nothing. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. And when it finally came out, 3 days after Thanksgiving, I met Robert Harland for breakfast at an old diner near Virginia Beach, the kind of place where the coffee arrives before you ask and every waitress calls you honey. He was already there when I arrived. Of course he was. He stood when he saw me. That alone told me how serious this was going to be. I'm sorry, he said simply. No excuses, no explanation, just sorry. Then he told me something I hadn't known. Jake didn't start talking about you after Thanksgiving. He's been doing it for years. I sat very still. Little comments at family gatherings, nothing dramatic enough to report. Just enough to slowly shape opinions. Dana got lucky. Dana got noticed because she looked good in uniform. Dana probably hasn't actually flown in years. Dana is one of those officers who talks more than she works. What did people say? I asked. Robert hesitated. That told me everything. Some believed him. That hurt more than I expected. Not because strangers believed it, because family did. People who had smiled at me across holiday tables. People who had apparently listened to Jake when I wasn't in the room. Then, Robert said something that made me sit up straighter. You know why I asked about your call sign? I assumed you recognized it. I recognized your name. He paused. You remember Captain Bill Rollins? I went very still. Of all the names I expected to hear that morning, that was not one of them. I know of him, I said carefully. Technically true. The reality was far more complicated. Robert studied my face. You saved his life. I looked away. Out the diner window, at passing traffic. A truck rolling through an intersection, a woman walking a dog, normal life, much easier to look at than old memories. I did my job, I said quietly. Same thing. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Robert told me something else, and this was the part I wasn't ready for. There's something you should know. His voice hardened slightly. Jake is giving that leadership presentation at Naval Station Norfolk in 4 days. I already knew that. He has a slide, Robert said carefully, a photograph of a Navy officer in uniform at a family barbecue. Something cold moved through my chest. Most people wouldn't recognize her, but anyone who knew her would. He didn't need to say more. I already understood. The caption underneath the photo read, "Perception versus performance." When image gets ahead of experience. I was the example. My photo, taken without my permission, was Jake's visual evidence for the argument he'd been making about me for years. Standing in a room full of Navy officers, community leaders, and retired personnel, he was going to use my face to make his point. "I wanted you to hear it from me," Robert said, "because if this gets worse, you'll know where it started." If this gets worse, not when Jake stops, not if things improve. If this gets worse, like he already knew his son, and he did. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you will leave you speechless. The morning of the luncheon started with rain, that steady Virginia coastal drizzle that makes everything heavier. I woke up before my alarm. My stomach was tight. Mark was already awake, pretending not to be. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. "That's not really an option." He knew I was right. My absence would become part of the story, and I was done letting other people write stories about me. We arrived at the conference building near the Naval Station Norfolk waterfront just before the event began. Retired officers, active duty personnel, community leaders, civilian contractors. A full room. I spotted Robert near the front. He gave me a small nod. Nothing more. Across the room, Jake stood near the projector, laughing, shaking hands, completely confident, like a man who had no idea a cliff was 2 steps behind him. For the first 10 minutes, honestly, Jake did well. He was charismatic, comfortable in front of people. The audience responded. People nodded, took notes, and then he kept talking. He moved into a section on leadership and public perception. "One challenge facing today's military," he said, "is image management. The public loves a clean story, a clean uniform, a good photo." Something cold settled in my stomach. He clicked the remote. There it was, my photo, blurred slightly but recognizable to anyone who knew me. The caption appeared underneath. "Perception versus performance. When image gets ahead of experience." A few people shifted in their seats. Jake smiled, relaxed, unaware. "We have to be careful that we don't confuse visibility with value." I stood up. Not dramatically, just stood. The room noticed immediately. Jake's smile faltered. "Lieutenant Harland," his expression tightened. Then professionally, "Yes, ma'am. Who gave you permission to use that image?" Silence. Complete. Instant. "It's anonymized," he said. "That's not what I asked." The room grew even quieter. Someone behind me shifted in their chair. "It's being used as a general example." Of what? "A leadership concept." "What leadership concept?" His confidence was slipping now. Not much, just enough for everyone to see it. "The difference between image and performance." "Did you verify the performance of the officer in that photograph?" No answer. "Did you?" Then, from the front row, a voice. Old, calm, steady. "That's a fair question." Every head turned. Captain Bill Rollins slowly rose from his seat. A cane beside his chair helped him stand, but once he was standing, the room paid attention. The kind of attention rank cannot command, only reputation. He looked at the slide, then at Jake, then finally at me. His expression softened, just briefly, before turning serious again. "Do you know who that officer is?" Jake swallowed. "No, sir. I know." The room was completely still. Rollins pointed toward me. "Her call sign is Jukebox." He paused. "Years ago, a lot of good people make good decisions during the very bad night. A man I cared about came home because of those decisions. Nobody moved. One of those people was her." Jake's face lost color, slowly, visibly. Everyone could see it. "Sir, I didn't know," he managed. Rollins nodded once. "Exactly. One word, the most devastating word in the room." Jake tried one more time. "I wasn't criticizing her specifically. Then why use my photo?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then Mark stood up. For the first time since Thanksgiving, the first time since everything. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Jake." A pause. "Take the slide down." Jake looked stunned. "Mark, take it down." And then Robert stood, slowly, The room went completely silent. Son. Jake turned. Dad, don't. Robert's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. I spent 30 years teaching sailors to respect the uniform. He looked at his son, then at the slide, then back again. Somewhere along the way, you learn to respect attention more. The moderator quietly removed the slide. The projector changed. The image disappeared, but the damage was done. After the session ended early, Jake found me near the parking lot. No audience, no microphone, just the two of us. You happy now? He asked. I looked at him. For the first time, I didn't see confidence. I saw fear. No, I said. He frowned. Then what was the point? I thought about Thanksgiving, the bathroom mirror. Every quiet little rumor I'd never known was circulating. Every family gathering where Jake had slowly been chipping away at my name. The point, I said, is that you don't get to make me smaller just because you're scared you aren't big enough. Jake had absolutely nothing to say to that, and for once in his life, the silence belonged to him. Things got worse before they got better. That's the part nobody expects. Most stories end after the confrontation. The truth is, that's often where the real mess begins. By Saturday, half the family had already picked a side. Some of them didn't pick mine. The text started arriving. Aunt Patty, Mark's sister, a cousin from Richmond I barely saw. Apparently, I had embarrassed Jake. Funny how that works. The person causing the problem gets sympathy. The person exposing the problem gets criticism. Jake's promotion package didn't move forward that year. Nobody publicly destroyed him. Nobody ended his career, but people started watching more closely, and for someone like Jake, who had lived on easy confidence and unchallenged assumptions, that was its own kind of reckoning. 3 months later, he called me. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. I wanted to apologize, he said. His voice sounded different, less polished, less certain. He kept going, with some difficulty. He told me he'd spent years convincing himself I was the problem. He told me he'd been jealous, not of a title or a rank, of the fact that I'd never had to tell people how important I was. I'd never chased attention, and people have respected me anyway. I used you to make myself feel bigger, he said. That was the truth, not the polished version, not the excuse, the actual truth. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, I told him. A short laugh came through the phone. Not happy, just honest. Can we start over? He asked. I thought about it long enough that he probably grew nervous. Then I said no, but we can start from here. The relief in his voice was immediate, and strangely, I felt it too. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but the pretending was finally over. Mark and I had our own harder conversation too. Sitting on the back patio one evening, watching a cargo ship move slowly through the harbor, he finally said what he should have said at Thanksgiving. I wasn't protecting peace, he said quietly. I was protecting myself. That kind of honesty, uncomfortable, unpolished, is the real kind. I told him I believed him, and I told him that apologies matter, but change behavior matters more. He heard me. This time, the older I get, the more I understand that some of your deepest wounds won't come from enemies. They'll come from people who know your name, people who sat at your dinner table, people you expected better from. What this whole experience taught me wasn't how to win an argument. It was how to draw a boundary. There's a real difference. Winning depends on someone else. Boundaries depend only on you. A few weeks after Jake called, I stood near the waterfront in Norfolk, just after sunrise. The harbor was quiet. My knee hurt. My jacket fit a little tighter than I'd like. And for the first time in months, none of that bothered me. I thought about the dinner table, the bathroom mirror, the slide. The moment Captain Rollins stood up with his cane and said 2 words that ended an argument Jake thought he'd already won. I know, respect isn't something you demand. It's something you carry, and sometimes the people who underestimate you reveal far more about themselves than they ever do about you. If you've ever been the person at the table that someone decided to make smaller, you already know what I mean. You don't have to prove a thing. You just have to keep being exactly who you are. The rest has a way of taking care of itself.